Not more than 6 killed as Russia bombed Kharkiv floods. 2 killed, 12 wounded as monsoon hit France's Corsica. In auctioned suitcases in New Zealand, remains of 2 children discovered, and Israel closes down NGOs murders Palestinian in occupied West Bank. First visit to the troubled country since her appointment last year. The military seized power in February 2021, hours before the country's new parliament was due to seat detained elected leader Aung San Suu Kyi and members of her civilian government. Since then, Aung San Suu Kyi has been tried and jailed on a slew of charges and still faces many more, while several anti-coup activists have been arrested. According to the Assistance Association for Political Prisoners, which has been tracking the violence, about 2,215 people have been murdered in the military's crackdown on its opponents. The military regime late last month executed 4 political activists in Myanmar's first use of the death penalty in over 30 years. Among the dead was Pheu Thor, a former legislator from Aung San Suu Kyi's National League for Democracy party. On Wednesday, United Nations envoy Noeleen Heyzer met coup leader Int'L. Heyzer's office said she had directly urged him to impose a halt to all future executions. She also called for an abrupt stop to the violence and the release of all political prisoners, including former Aung San Suu Kyi advisor Sean Turnell and Australian economist. Farhan Haq, United Nations deputy spokesperson, said while Heyzer had asked to meet Aung San Suu Kyi, she had not been able to do so. He described the meeting between Heyzer and the army chief as a good discussion and said that the United Nations will see whether her major demands will be carried out. The United Nations will continue to push on those points, he added. Diplomatic efforts to resolve the crisis, led mainly by the Association of Southeastern Asian Nations, ASEAN, have made tiny progress, with the generals declining to deliver on a peace strategy that was agreed upon last year. Even while Heyzer was in Myanmar, a spokesperson for the military administration lashed out at the 10-member group for excluding its generals from regional gatherings, accusing it of caving to external pressure. Some members of ASEAN, which Myanmar joined in 1997, recently indicated that the group could be forced to go further if the military continues to stall. Speaking at a regular press conference, spokesperson Zhao Min-tun rubbished ASEAN's moves. Heyzer stressed in her statement as she left Myanmar that United Nations engagement does not in any way confer legitimacy on the military's administration. Volodymyr Zelensky, Ukraine's president, has condemned a Russian invasion that the region's governor said killed almost 6 people and wounded 16 in Kharkiv, Ukraine's second city, as despicable and cynical. Zelensky said a block of flats had been totally destroyed in Wednesday night's attack, which he said had no justification and shows the powerlessness of the aggressor. The raid started a fire in the building in the northeastern city, Mayor Igor Terekov said, according to reports. The president's media team shared footage of the aftermath of the attack, showing emergency services assembled outside the blazing building. A voice on the video described the scene and said many people remain unaccounted for. Kharkiv was a Russian aim in the early days of the war, but its soldiers were not able to take the city. While Moscow has now moved its military attention to Ukraine's east and south, Kharkiv continues to suffer attacks of the air. Russia invaded Ukraine on February 24th, claiming it needed to demilitarize its neighbor and protect Russian-speaking communities there, but thousands have been killed and millions of Ukrainians have fled. Ukraine, which broke free of Russian rule when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, has accused Moscow of waging an imperial-style war of conquest. Moscow annexed the southern peninsula of Crimea in 2014 and has supported separatist territories in Donetsk and Luhansk. It previously saw Crimea as a secure rear base for its war in Ukraine, but the area has come under increasing pressure in recent weeks. Now, some 2 people were murdered and 12 others injured when strong winds and hail hit the French island of Corsica, while monsoon have left about 1,000 households without electricity in mainland France. Parts of France have had more rain in just a few hours than in all of the recent months, with large flooding a result after weeks of heat waves and droughts degraded the soil's capacity to absorb water. On Thursday, Korsika, a major tourist destination, became the center of a low-pressure area distinct by strong storms with hail, heavy rain, and winds over 220 kilometers per hour, 130 miles per hour, according to a spokesman for the region. A 13-year-old girl and a 72-year-old woman were killed, the prefect's office said, adding that 12 people were injured. Meanwhile, grid operators said about 1,000 households were without electricity after a storm destroyed some infrastructure in the Southern Law and Ain departments. In Mercer on Wednesday evening, streets were flooded and streams of water ran down steps in the port city. Videos shared on social media showed. Further north in France, drought has left the River Loire, famous for the castles along its banks, so thin that even its flat-bottomed tourist barges can hardly navigate it. In New Zealand, police have confirmed that human remains found in 2 suitcases bought at an auction of household items were of 2 primary school-aged children. Tafilo Detective Inspector said on Thursday that the bodies found in the suitcases were likely to have been in storage for numerous years, and the victims are thought to have been between 5 and 10 years old. The detective said the investigation was in its early stages but will be severe. This includes establishing where, when and how. Vailua said, according to reports in capital Auckland. The bodies were found by a family who had purchased personal and household items from a storage unit in an online auction last week. Police repeated that the family who bought the suitcases were not linked to the homicide and understandably distressed by the discovery, he said, adding that they have asked for privacy. Police first set up a crime scene at the family's Auckland home last week and opened a homicide investigation, but had declined to go into the details of the case until Thursday. Personal items discovered alongside the suitcases are helping provide evidences to identify the victims. Both the storage unit and property where the suitcases were taken to have been carefully examined by criminal experts. Police in New Zealand are now working with the International Criminal Agency Interpol in their investigation. Valua said identification procedures for the children were ongoing, but that they have relatives living in New Zealand. He said the relatives might not be aware of the children's deaths. Still on the news, the Israeli army has closed down many Palestinian civil society organizations in the West Bank few hours after a Palestinian man was shot dead during armed clashes that broke out following an Israeli attack on the occupied northwestern bank city of Nablus. On Thursday, according to the official, the youth who was killed was identified as 20-year-old Wissam Nasser Khalifa from the Balata refugee camp on the outskirts of Nablus city. Israeli forces had attacked Nablus just after midnight to secure the entry of Jewish settlers to the flashpoint site of Joseph's Tomb east of Nablus, the army said. Heated gunfights broke out with Palestinian fighters during the raid. Not more than 4 other Palestinians were injured with live ammunition, 3 of whom are said to be in critical condition. No Israeli casualties were reported by Israeli army. Separately, a huge Israeli army convoy attacked the town of Ramallah in the central occupied West Bank at dawn on Thursday. Israeli forces broke into and shut down the offices of 7 civil society and human rights organizations. 6 of the organizations raided on Thursday had been banned by Israel as terrorist organizations in October 2021 and accused of ties to the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, PFLP. They included Ademir Prisoner Support and Human Rights Association, Al-Haq Rights Group, the Union of Palestinian Women Committees, UPWC, the Union of Agricultural Work Committees, UAWC, the Beeson Center for Research and Development, and the Palestine Chapter for the Geneva-based Defense for Children International. The 7th organization raided was the Union of Health Work Committees, UHWC. The organization's offices were ransacked and their equipment seized. Doors were welded shut with an Israeli military order posted on them declaring the organizations unlawful. Head of the board of directors at the UHWC, Mazen Rantisi, which runs numerous hospitals and dozens of clinics across the occupied West Bank, said the closures are part of a long-standing Israeli policy. There are more stories. China to send soldiers to Russia for joint military drills. Beijing's defense ministry has said Chinese army will travel to Russia to take part in joint military drills that will begin month-end. Last month, Moscow declared plans to hold Vostok East military exercise from August 30th to September 5th, saying some foreign forces will also take part without naming them. Beijing and Moscow have close defense relations, and China has said it wants to push bilateral relations to a higher level, even as Moscow faces international sanctions and widespread condemnation over its February 24th invasion of Ukraine. The Chinese Defense Ministry, in a statement, said the global is to deepen practical and friendly cooperation with the armies of participating countries, enhance the level of planned collaboration among the participating parties, and reinforce the ability to respond to many security threats. India, Belarus, Mongolia, Tajikistan, and other countries will also participate, it said. Relations between Russia and China have grown progressively close under Chinese President Xi Jinping and his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin, and Beijing has been under pressure for its opposition to sanctions enforced by numerous Western countries over the war. Shortly before the attack, Moscow and Beijing agreed on a no-limit partnership. Beijing said its choice to participate in the joint drills was unrelated to the present international and regional situation. Russia and China held joint military exercises in north-central China involving over 10,000 troops a year ago this month. Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu praised the drills in China's Ningxia and advised they could be advanced more. Russia and China in October held joint naval drills in the Sea of Japan. Days later, Russia and Chinese warships held their first joint patrols in Western Pacific. The following month, South Korea's military said it had scrambled fighter jets after 2 Chinese and 7 Russian warplanes intruded into its air defense identification zone during what Beijing called regular training. The Vostok drills are the second joint military exercise conducted by Chinese and Russian troops this year. Bombers from the 2 countries conducted a 13-hour drill close to Japan and South Korea in May, forcing those countries to scramble jet fighters as United States President Joe Biden was visiting Tokyo. State Department spokesperson Ned Price said that while warming ties between China and Russia undermine global security, Washington did not read anything into the drills. In business and economy, Central Bank of Sri Lanka holds rates steady. The Central Bank of Sri Lanka, CBSL, has kept its major rate steady, a broadly expected move as it awaits the consequence of past rise to drop through the economy, while a fall in global commodity prices is also likely to soothe domestic inflation. On Thursday, the standing lending facility rate stayed at 15.5%, while the standing deposit facility rate remained at 14.5%. 11 out of 15 economists and analysts polled had expected rates to remain unchanged. The central bank has raised rates by a record 950 basis points so far this year to battle high inflation in Sri Lanka, which is floppy under a critical economic crisis. A foreign exchange shortage has left the government battling to pay for vital imports of fuel, fertilizers, food and medicine. Inflation hit 60.8% year-on-year in July, and food costs expanded by a staggering 90.9% according to the latest government data. The bank said the measures taken by it and the government so far will help contain aggregate demand pressures, while an anticipated decline in global commodity prices will pass through to domestic prices. The central bank said the result of persistent supply-side interruptions, chiefly due to shortages of power and energy and uncertainties associated with socio-political developments, are expected to have caused significant adverse effects on economic growth in the second quarter. Several people protesting against the economic crisis forced the resignation of then-President Gotabaya Rajapaksa in July. He was replaced by veteran politician Ranil Wickremesinghe. The central bank said growth was expected to remain passive in the third quarter as well. Analysts said the economy will undergo an abrupt contraction this year. In Africa, in Western Kenya, intensifying drought threatens lives. In Western Kenya, a sunny sky can be a threatening sign of worse things to come. In Garissa, living creatures hardly make it. Either death awaits or exile for those who wish to survive. Kenya is facing an extraordinary dire drought due to the accumulative effects of 4 consecutive failed rainy seasons, according to National Drought Management Authority (NDMA). Climate talks have turned upside down the lives of pastoralists. Livestock, one of their important livelihood sectors, had been harshly affected. Staple food prices have gone through the roof while daily wages continue to plunge. The fall of purchasing power led to rising rates of malnutrition among the most vulnerable communities. According to the National Drought Management Authority Food Security June report, the number of people facing food insecurity in Kenya has augmented from the previous 3.5 million to 4.1 million. The Kenyan Red Cross Society and the international community of the Red Cross have been distributing relief food and animal feed in 4 drought-affected counties. In order to assist communities build resilience in the face of the unpredictable weather patterns, households have also received cash support. Drugs and other emergency health supplies distributed by UNICEF and partners reached 150,000 people in Marsabit, Turkana, Wajir, Mandera, Garissa and Tana River, the OCHA said. Drought-related disease outbreaks of Kalaza, chikungunya, dengue fever and yellow fever have been reported in drought-affected arid and semi-arid lands as well, further compounding the vulnerability of communities and their coping mechanisms to drought emergency. Syrian refugee claims killings, rapes in Libya. According to reports, a Syrian English teacher floating on a small boat between Malta and Italy waiting to be rescued told of the atrocities he witnessed against asylum seekers in Libya. He said the Africans were shot in Zuwara, adding that 2 Syrian women were raped. He fled his home in 2021 to escape the mandatory military draft for what he described as Bashar al-Assad's army. Noor and 5 other men who left Libya spent 40 hours at sea before they were spotted by Frontex, the European Union's border and Coast Guard agency, in the Maltese search and rescue zone. The Open Arms NGO rescue ship approached the small boat and found 5 men, 3 Syrians, 2 Libyans on board. One was badly dehydrated and the Open Arms nurse gave medication, blankets and proposed ways for them to protect themselves from the sun while waiting for the Italian Coast Guard to arrive. Hundreds of thousands of migrants hoping to reach Europe have made their way through Libya, where a profitable trafficking and smuggling business has thrived in a country without a functioning government, fragmented for years between rival administrations in the east and west, each backed by arms groups and foreign governments. Migrants have passed through Libya detention centers, often tell of the atrocities inside and of the abuse when captured by the Libyan Coast Guard. But Noor suggested that killings are even carried out in the street. Human rights violations and crimes against migrants and refugees have been extensively documented by the United Nations and other human rights organizations. According to the UNHCR, as of August 14th, more than 70,000 asylum seekers have crossed the Mediterranean to Europe in 2022. Over 900 have died in the attempt or have gone missing. Finally, Tshisekedi, Democratic Republic of Congo president, takes over from Chikwera to lead SADC. President of DRC, Felix Tshisekedi, has taken control of the Southern African Development Community, SADC, during the 42nd Ordinary Summit of Head of States and Government of this organization, which is being held in Kinshasa from August 17th and 18th, 2022. He replaces Lazarus McCarthy Chikwera, President of the Republic of Malawi. The outgoing SADC president called upon member countries to be independent of external influences, especially the Democratic Republic of Kenya. The Kinshasa summit is hosting a dozen of SADC heads of state and will review progress in regional integration in line with SADC aspirations, which envision an industrialized, peaceful, inclusive, competitive, middle to a high-income region where all citizens enjoy sustainable economic well-being. The Congolese head of state is also the present president of the Economic Community of Central African State, ECOWAS. The question of the Rwandan presence on Congolese soil will also be raised, knowing that it is Angola, also a member of SADC, which is leading part of the negotiation between Kinshasa and Kigali. Earlier, to refresh our memories, Stop Executions and Violence, United Nations envoy tells Myanmar's military. Not more than 6 killed as Russia bombed Kharkiv floods. 2 killed, 12 wounded as monsoon hit France's Corsica. In auction suitcases in New Zealand, remains of 2 children discovered, and Israel closes down NGOs, murders Palestinian in occupied West Bank. Thanks for staying with us. Do not limit yourself. Many people limit themselves to what they think they can do. You can go as far as your mind lets you. What you believe, remember, you can achieve, according to Mary K. Ash. From all of us at Echo Television, have a good evening.